Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here. So I'm Tina, and this is Lynn. So we're going to basically tell you about the Quantum Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission. And it might even be one of the star shots that Johnny mentioned. Who knows? We'll talk. So what is this all about? We've been working quite hard on this whole idea for quite some time. And it's all around promoting this concept around healthy people, healthy planet, and healthy growth, economic growth. We launched it in November. It was presented in a Lancet article. We can share it with you afterwards, of the same sort of title. And we have the backing of a number of very eminent scientists, entrepreneurs, policymakers from around the world, people like Brian Kennedy, Nir Barzilai, and many others. So these are all authors on the Lancet article, so you can have a look. And actually Dave Furman tomorrow is also involved. So what we're trying to do is really synthesizing the opportunities that really cross-cut the intersection of science, tech, policy, industry, etc. Because I think there's a lot of scientists here, and I think we have to kind of step back sometimes and actually work out, well, how are we really going to kind of get this out of the lab and into the hands of real people? And how are we going to bring sort of, it's taking kind of like a cells to cities approach, and we'll be outlining what we're planning to do there. And actually, it's really trying to understand the links between the biology and the psychology and behavioral aspects of aging well. So some of the stuff that I know Sonia had mentioned is very much at the heart of what we're trying to do. And actually, another, I guess, piece of difference, I think, is Lynn and I we work in the UK. I'm Canadian and did a lot of work in the States. We travel around the world all the time, but actually there's some really interesting ingredients in the UK at the moment which actually poise us quite well to tap into the opportunities that are happening obviously at an exponential rate in science and technology, but also coming out of the EU. The government are really committed to looking at sort of regulatory reform in all sorts of areas around data, digital, clinical trials. And so we have the opportunity in the next sort of, what I would say, in the next 5 years to really do something quite different, working internationally with a range of partners. So I'll just, next slide. So why? So actually, a bunch of stuff, and I think this is actually an existential question for this group, like, what are we all here to do? And I think certainly, we know that there's some big problems, actually. We have to remind ourselves, actually, our lifespan is decreasing, like in the richest countries in the world. Our healthy life expectancy between richest and poorest people is actually widening, it's not narrowing. Obviously, COVID had, that's a lot to do with COVID. And I think there are some interesting questions that came up, actually, even by Joe, for example, is like, what are we here to do? Is it really to make those people who can afford, all this wonderful science, to actually live even better and healthier while we leave the rest behind? So that's certainly not something that we're trying to do with our mission. It's very much about extending and making sure that all this wonderful research is actually going to benefit all of us in as fair a way as possible. And so this is something that I know in the UK we have a government manifesto commitment that's still very in place. It actually was set in 2017 as part of the industrial strategy around increasing healthy life expectancy while minimizing health and well-being inequalities. And let's kind of get real here. We know that the reason why people don't live a long, happier life is they've got crap lives. They've, hope, aspiration, purpose, all these things that Johnny talked about, that's at the real root of why people don't live healthier, longer lives. And we kind of have to get real and sort of see that as actually one of the problems that we as a community and scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs could actually be part of solving. So that's very much at the heart of this mission. And we know, and certainly in the UK, the NHS, our public health system, we spend 40% of that budget goes on preventable lifestyle-related conditions, and actually a lot of it is attached to poverty, despair, all those sorts of things. We can see it in the streets of San Francisco. We can see it in the poor areas around the country in the UK. So, and we know that the impact of all this research that we're doing could have such a dramatic, curing, it's all about, we need a preventative health paradigm. We need to move away from the cure all the time. And actually, if you look at all the trillions that have been spent in cancer, cardiovascular research, it's only given us 2 to 3 extra years of healthy life expectancy, whereas the benefit of everything that we're doing now could actually add many, many more years to the sort of hypothetical 50-year-old. And we know that there's a lot of money to be made too. You can have money and social impact. And I know Andrew Scott, who's a dear friend of ours, who's involved in the mission, he did that piece of research with David Sinclair, that, it could actually add trillions and trillions, 38 trillion, I think, a year they estimated, by delaying aging by a year. So there's a lot at stake here. So, and this is actually very much at the heart of what we're trying to do with the mission. So next slide. So what is this all about? So what we're saying, it's actually time for a quantum leap forward. Now, yes, we know there's quantum computing, and actually there's, what is this all about quantum computing? Yes, we will leverage frontier technologies like AI, like quantum systems biology, but actually it's about a quantum leap forward in the thinking. And the fact is, we have a sick care model. We need to rethink things, and we need to make all of this accessible to more people. And actually what we really need to do is to actually understand that the psychology and behavioral aspects of the biology. And I think that's a really interesting area, which will probably be where our question is. And I think and the thing is, our whole concept, which is what we talk about in the Lancet article, is around this whole idea of the exposome. So it's all around the wider environmental aspects of our lives. It's the wider determinants of health that actually really need to be better understood and factor into some of the research that we're talking about today, and making sure that we understand that actually the 80% of our determinants actually lie outside the medical record, and we need to look at all the other factors that actually should be. 1 minute, okay. So I'm gonna very quickly move on to Lynn, who will tell us a little bit more about how we're actually going to do that. We're going to map exponential insights. We've got a whole bunch of ideas around creating an open distributed model for a biomarker data bank. So obviously the work of the Methuselah Foundation is really, really interesting. An atlas of geoprotective interventions. These are all the sort of outputs of some of the research that we're going to be conducting, and through an AI platform that we're developing, next generation sort of products and services. And of course, the end result will be that open platform that will be accessible in a way to really spur ethical aging research, data philanthropy, etc.
I think the final thing to say, obviously we can talk a little bit more about it, is that this is very much a federated approach, and we have citizens at the centre. We have 10 global chapters in China, Taiwan, Singapore, US, Canada, Italy, South America as well, where we've got citizens who are really hungry for knowledge on what they can do. It really echoed in terms of what colleagues said earlier about what can I do in order to leverage this great increase in healthy life expectancy. Currently everything feels very siloed, it feels very separate, and the Aging Intelligence platform approach is intended for citizens to bring it together, to democratise the access to all of this wonderful knowledge and research on healthy longevity, so that citizens directly benefit. So we're very much focusing on brain health, very much what Sonia was talking about earlier in terms of brain capital, leveraging existing technology, very much focusing on midlife, early life in terms of like longevity and aging, and then very much sort of driving all of this through a federated data platform. I'll just leave you with some of the individuals, colleagues that we've mentioned before who were here. And then in terms of the timeline, we're pretty well advanced in terms of the launch. We'd be delighted to hear from colleagues who want to kind of participate in the mission, but very much kind of rolling it forward in terms of very much this kind of longevity as a service. From a citizen point of view, this is feeling very fragmented. What are the business models that we need? What are the commercial models that we need in order to make sure that people truly benefit from this in San Francisco, but across the world? It's pretty much affecting every country and every city. So the AI platform is very much the mechanism to do it, and we definitely need that quantum healthy longevity leap forward.
Wonderful.
And this is at the National Innovation Centre for Aging in the UK. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, thank
But
you.
it's an international effort.
Amazing. Questions, comments?
Does the exposome include exposure to aging interventions?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very much what we've been looking at is how we can, obviously Dave Furman will talk a little bit more on it tomorrow, but actually bring through kind of climate health and planetary health, looking at kind of pollution, but also kind of joining it all together. But the aging interventions are feeling very, very separate at the moment. And so part of this is, instead of working in silos, how can we bring it all together and get that kind of big leap forward in terms of actually, applying the knowledge that we all have.
Yes.
So I'm curious about this. So say I am a person living in Costa Rica and I want to use your citizen portal. Why do I go there? What kind of information do I get, and how does it help?
It helps you by understanding what you might do. Obviously, there's gaps in that. We're building it at the moment. But in terms of actually understanding the personalised approach, some of this might be through a health provider. But actually, you know, in terms of all of that knowledge about everything from, you know, what I might do in terms of my inflammation response, how do I know that? How do I get hold of that information at the moment? So what the platform can do is actually take some of that data and personalising it for you. Equally as well, from a research point of view, we have all of this knowledge that's very disparate. How can we bring it together in a federated approach, so much more of an open data framework that would help new companies setting up in order to be able to access the data that's already out there, but equally also help existing companies go faster.
It's also important to mention that, I mean, Lynn runs the Voice Network, and actually it's all about really understanding what people value and want from their lives, because we often forget that. Like, why do people want to live a really long time? You have to tap into their motivations, desires, their aspirations, ambitions, all that sort of stuff. And that's the stuff that you're doing all the time with your Voice Network around the world.
Yeah, and the Voice Network is very much about, you know, someone mentioned about wearables and so on. So these are people who are willing to test products in real time. And again, all intended to accelerate. So that when we have a great idea, we can get people to test it in real time, give their feedback, give their sort of information in terms of what they aspire to have, how would they like to change that product or service, all intended to kind of accelerate, catalyze, to make sure that all this fantastic science is reaching people much, much quicker.
And getting the evidence to actually, at the end of the day, to get the evidence to actually influence investment and policy, and you're a public policy person. I mean, you know, the government needs to have this information, understanding, you know, what the benefit will be by focusing more of that money, investment money, on the preventative health spectrum. Because at the moment, it's all disconnected, and the system change element is just, all the incentives, the metrics, everything is misaligned, and we have to these are the big questions that we have to ask ourselves as a society, our governments, working together with scientists, entrepreneurs. So you do need to come together, because otherwise, you know, the status quo will continue to reign, and it's obviously not working. So, and this is why we have a unique opportunity. We've got a UK government who are actually looking at this. We've got a government manifesto commitment. There's some really interesting stuff post-Brexit with regulatory reform, in finance reform, pension funds being able to invest in higher risk innovation areas. So there's an interesting there's a series of ingredients right now that are creating an opportunity that we just think we need to take, you know, because there's obviously some pretty serious systemic issues that are preventing progress.
Thank you. So what's the frontier that you want people to work on here?
So we thought probably to add to this list, and it's come up, is really to kind of explore that space of linking the biology with the psychological and behavioral aspects of aging.
And one sentence question.
So, I guess the question is, can we develop develop biomarkers and the thinking around biomarkers that really tap into that understanding of the biology and the psychology and the behavioral aspects of aging.